So I'm the odd one out in this panel because I read the newspapers, occasionally contribute to them, but I'm not a media person. And therefore, when I think about participatory democracy, the question that we are talking about today, the undercurrents of participatory democracy, and most importantly, one of the very important issues that my fellow panelists have brought up in the context of English language versus vernacular language, news reporting, and so on. It might be useful also to reflect a little bit on the fact that in my work I found that the people of India are actually very keen to hold on to and preserve the democratic spaces that democracy has made available to them. And in every way in our daily lives, there have been many efforts at mobilizing, collecting, and using the power of institutions of participation to hold the government accountable. And that has led to some very important and powerful successes of what has made our democracy enduring and strong even under pressure. A good example of that is the Right to Information Act itself, which emerged very much from mobilization on the ground that pushed our democracy to open up its spaces. And that in many ways is a reaction of precisely the phenomenon that you all spoke about of an elite congregation to some level that in many ways has commanded and steered the institutions of democracy, which in some ways has served to keep certain voices out. And I think those voices are clamoring, pushing, and moving, and in important ways moving forward to make our democracy far more representative and far more participatory. I think the real challenge that we face in India today is that we need to hold on to those spaces. And I worry very much that those spaces are increasingly getting closed and smaller because the space and tolerance for dissent is weakening and reducing. If you just take the Right to Information Act itself, and our moderator today was of India's first information commissioner. The numbers today of what is happening in our state information commissions, the kind of backlog of cases, the time gaps in the government's responsiveness to Right to Information applications, we are weakening the one most powerful institution for participatory democracy by allowing them to completely disintegrate. That's when the ability of the real voices of India to start influencing the institutions of democracy become closed, and that's when our democracy is truly threatened. What happens in our TV studios, what happens in our newspapers, certainly frames the nature of political discussion and political discourse. It certainly impacts the ways in which democracy plays out on the ground. But I think what we really need to be worried about is this question of what is happening to the core institutions of democracy that ensure that our democratic systems are accountable and transparent. Another important example is linked to decentralization. The most effective way by which people can in fact mobilize and hold their governments accountable is through strong local governments. We have had constitutional amendments that date back 20 to 30 years. Increasingly over time, across governments, and I think more sharply today, we are finding a situation where the federal nature of India is getting increasingly more centralized, and particularly at the grassroots level. The basic things that local governments need to function effectively in terms of basic finances, basic resources, to be able to perform their elected duty is now getting very difficult. The central government is most certainly responsible, but state governments too are equally predatory. State finance commissions are not being set up. So these institutions too, the reason why, this is what we learn as policy folks in school, Public Finance 101, why do you need strong local governments? Because local governments are most responsive to needs of people on the ground. That's where citizens can truly hold their governments to account in a very real way. When these institutions are left moribund and defunct, democracy starts suffering in ways that are unimaginable. That's what we should be truly worried about as well. And any conversation on participatory democracy and the undercurrents of participatory democracy must take these issues very seriously. The right to information, the right to congregate, the right to dissent, the right to hold rallies in Jantar Mantar or wherever you have is the core of democracy, and it is the most effective way by which the real voices of India will get heard in Parliament. We have to preserve.